if you want to find truth, don't go to a grocery store, right? It's one of the most difficult places to find um, things that are true because and a place to find congruency across ideas. If you move from one product to the other, you're going to find contraindications, or contrary ideas. You're going to find not contraindications too, but you're going to find ideas that seem to conflict with one another over and over again. And so, how do you navigate food marketing? Dr. Miller with a video that hopefully you find useful as you go to the grocery store and you ask some of these questions about what you're eating and what you should eat. By the way, if you'd like to hear more about topics in fitness and exercise science, subscribe to my channel and be sure to check out some of the other videos I've made as well. Okay, so you go to the grocery store and you see things like natural meat. You go to the grocery store and see things like this food is missing something, antibiotics, GMO. It's a food has a sweetener in it. You read the popular media, and the popular media says it was bad, now it's good again, and copious amounts, which is good news for me. Eggs are bad, eggs are good, right? I mean, what's going on that we cannot seem to arrive at a conclusion when we have a fair amount of research literature now on these different topics? So what is happening here? Well, let's start with let's start a little bit different paradigm. So in nutrition science, in the way people pursue nutrition, many times we think of it from the top down. Like, okay, what is the best I can do? I want to know what the best is. The best is organic, this and that and the other. We don't know that, right? But that's what I'm saying. We start in the best, and many times at the best level, there's a lot of things going on. We don't really fully appreciate what best is yet. It's still being researched. There's so many potential um, um, configurations of research. So like who's best being studied with, in other words, like disease people or people already healthy? Who are these people? What have they been eating for the last 25 years? And then they just study how old are they? So on and so forth. Let's instead start with what we do know. How about that? And I don't mean that in a condescending sort of way, but I mean, let's start with what we know. I mean, things that we're comfortable with, like you need to cook meat. You need to store food properly. Wash your vegetables and fruit before you eat them. Again, these sound a little silly, but if you get overwhelmed with nutrition, start with what we do know. We do know, and it's supported by, and I don't like the word truth necessarily when we reference to research literature, but it's supported by there's some topics that are supported by research literature. Fruits and vegetables are good for you. Whether you're a plant-based person or not, fruit or vegetables are good for you. If you're eating no fruit and vegetables, you should be. Because we know the research literature exists, you live longer. The more fruits and vegetables you eat, you live longer. And so, if you follow that logic, you can see where veganism and plant-based diets have arisen as this healthy choice, because that's taking this idea of plant-based diets all the way to the extreme now. Like all I eat is a plant-based diet. That's it. I don't eat anything else. Okay. Now, like any extreme, when you go that far, you lose out on other things. So in this case, let's look at something else we do know is supported. Protein is a great way to manage weight and is important for body functions like maintaining skeletal muscle mass. And everything you see in this video that you're looking at from me is protein, right? We're all made out of protein, okay? Proteins of some configuration, some amino acid configuration, right? And so we need protein. Well, we know that, okay? So what are at least the general range? Well, 1 gram per kilogram of body weight, okay? That's a good place to start, all right? So let's just start there. I need protein. I should eat fruits and vegetables. That's a great place to start. So when you go to the grocery store, you're like, okay, where's the protein? Okay, I'm going to buy this protein source. And I'm going to look at fruits and vegetables. I'm going to buy their source. Okay. What do we know? Well, we know that when things are processed, they lose, even if you process them, if you take a fruit and vegetables home and the way you prepare them could cause the micronutrients to be lost, or some of the micronutrients to be lost. So the fresher the food, the better it's going to be, because it just hasn't been processed and handled and hasn't sat outside and had oxygen work on it. And right? You cut an apple in half and leave it out. Guess what? It turns brown, right? I mean, the antioxidant quality of that apple is getting to work. And so that's what we do know. We know that fresher food is better, okay? Just because it's maintained some of its micronutrients and it hasn't had things added to it like the best preservative since antiquity, which is sodium, right? Now, some sodium is not a bad thing, but if that's all you eat is processed foods, we know that high amounts of sodium is bad for you. Now, again, I like the word moderation, but of course that has its limitations. Like you could say, well, I'm drinking gasoline in moderation. Well, okay, so that's obviously none is going to be the right choice in that example, right? Fruits and vegetables, you could hypothetically say eat as much as you can stand. I mean, you're going to have GI problems at some point if you do, but you could do that. You're going to be so freaking full and feel terrible that you'll stop yourself. That's the power of fiber, by the way, and food that has that kind of density to it. At least most of it, thinking like an apple, right? You can't eat 30 apples, but you can eat 30 donuts probably. Or 4 donuts, which is the equivalent of 30 apples, kind of thing, right? And so, the fresher the food is going to be the better. And so the further away you move from processed food, the better. I'm not talking about GMOs and all this other stuff. Okay. I'm just talking about the closer to the time the meat was slaughtered, the closest, those type of things, the better it's going to be because the less processing it's undergone. And so if you think of it that way, you've eliminated many ideas that are, revolve around, whether a food is healthy or not. So like high sodium, whether a food has been radiated or not, or you know what I mean, all these different things that many times are worried about when it comes to food preparation. Now, I realize that may not be possible always to get fresh food. I get it. Because fresher the food is, the more expensive it is. Okay? And so when you evaluate then a food that is further away from the time it was fresh, you have to look at what's been added. So if you buy a can of green beans and there's 500 milligrams of sodium in there, obviously that's not as good a choice as if you went to a frozen food that's been flash frozen when it was pulled out of the field. So that is a way of moving closer to the freshness, but not paying the exorbitant price that might be from a fresh batch of green beans, right? You buy those and purchase those per pound. So there are ways to scale up. In other words, scale out from freshness and still be affordable. So even your meat sources, I would argue that a fatty piece of beef that you can get that's cheaper than a processed, protein source, even a deli meat, is going to be healthier than the deli meat. The deli meat has been processed. It's loaded with sodium. Okay, that meat source you bought that has a little bit more saturated fat in it, as long as you don't eat 50 of them, you eat your fruits and vegetables, you can find a nice balance there, and you're probably going to be fuller, faster, and feel more satisfied with that steak that had more fat in it. And I realize steak's expensive. I'm just saying some sort of fat, cut of meat that's a little fattier than you would have if you would have looked at the process route and say, well, I saved some money here, but you're not in the long run because you're going to end up eating more of that food or throwing more of it away and have to repurchase it. Or in terms of health, it may even be a more unhealthy way to go just because it has some of these preservatives in it that we do know are linked to things like hypertension. I'm talking about sodium here. Okay. And so, as you scale up, you got to look, okay, well, if I scale up to lunch meat because it's easier, it's cheaper, what do I lose? And could I actually kind of go sideways and say, all right, I'm going to go to the meat aisle and find something that is closer to fresh, but maybe on the surface a little more unhealthy, right? I'm not advocating eating a lot of 80% lean hamburger, but I would argue that eating 80% lean hamburger with a vegetable complement would be better than dosing yourself with a whole bunch of processed meat otherwise. Okay, so like other forms of processed meat that are further down the chain, that are loaded with sodium and, still have the high fat content anyway, potentially. Okay, now again, I'm not trying to compare apples to oranges here and saying, okay, a fatty piece of beef versus some processed turkey is not going to have the same amount of fat. Fair enough. But the satiety that comes from that fatty piece of meat might be better and stop you from eating more other stuff than would the lunch meat. Okay, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here is sometimes when we look at things, we worry too much. We major in the minors, right? We worry about all these small things like, GMOs and these other things, but in so doing, we avoid food that could actually help us be healthier because of our behavior change, because of being full faster, because of some of the satisfaction we get from eating some of these foods. And so then we go to a processed food that has a higher caloric density and has no micronutrients at all potentially, has a much less satiety reducing effect than does that fatty piece of meat. You eat a hamburger that even if it's 80%, and again, I'm not advocating this, but man, it'd be trade-offs, right? And the research literature says be very careful with red meat, and I would support that. That's something we do know as well, that I would limit red meat as much as possible. I'm just using an example here that it'd be better to have a fatty, piece of beef and feel full and eat less and make sure you're eating some vegetables with it than to say, well, I'm going to avoid that beef and then go load up on a processed food that is not going to provide that same level of satiety, okay? And may not even predispose you to eat vegetables with it, right? I mean, usually a meat source, it's easier to think of eating some vegetables with a meat that, a protein source that's you can hold in your hands and it's heavy and it's real than, if you have a bag of processed meat or even lunch, deli meat. It's harder to think about a vegetable being with that. I realize you can make a sandwich and all those things, but the amount of vegetables that you have on a sandwich compared to the vegetables you might have on the side of a piece of steak is a little bit different. So I'm just trying to think out, as we look through food, some simple things is, again, what do we know? Is things we're confident in. We know protein's important. We know micronutrients are important. We know fruits and vegetables are good for you. Even if you started there and you said, I'm not eating the best cut of meat right now, but man, I'm pounding fruits and vegetables. If there is an eraser in physiology, I would say it's exercise to some degree, and then certainly fruits and vegetables. And even if you don't like one, just hammer the other one. Like, I hate vegetables. Well, do you like fruit? Yeah, I like fruit. Okay, then hammer that fruit. And there's a spectrum of fruit, of course. A banana is different than a grapefruit in terms of caloric density. But still, if a banana gets it done for you, and that's better than no bananas. And that's, again, those are the thought processes you enter into these arguments about nutrition. That's not major in the minors. That's major in the majors first. Let's get with the things we know. And then we can we can argue over GMOs and everything else. So that's like saying, we're all eating fruits and vegetables. We're all full and we're not over consuming processed foods. We're all at a healthy body weight. We're all this. Now we can fight over whether we think organic, produces 2% better outcomes than non-organics. Don't start with that argument first, though, because it makes no sense if you're arguing over the 2% and 98% that we are feeling confident isn't in order yet. It's the same argument with nutrition and supplements, okay, which I'll make another video on momentarily. So I hope you found this valuable. Didn't get lost in the weeds too much. I'm just trying to recenter these ideas of nutrition's not that hard. It really isn't. What makes it difficult is the constant screaming about these small factors that may matter once we have the big ones in order. Until we have the big ones in order, who cares, right? Who cares? Start with what we know. Work out from there, okay? Limit red meat consumption, but don't avoid it to the point where you are consuming other things that are far more unhealthy, right? I can't afford fresh vegetables. What can you afford? Look at the tree now of processedness. Frozen vegetables are cheap. Okay, I can't afford fresh vegetables all the time. They go bad too fast. Same with fruit, right? My kids eat a lot of fruit. And that is one of the greatest expenses we have. And that's difficult to keep up with. We have to find fruit that we can afford that's fresh. And yeah, you want to eat the rainbow, but sometimes that's not possible. You purchase what you can that is on that healthy spectrum. And if that moves out a little bit into the process, that's fine. But you have to evaluate how far you're willing to go on that process continuum before backing up and saying, well, I can eat something that's fresher, that's just on the surface slightly more healthy. But what does that do for me in the long run? Well, that's going to provide better health benefits and better weight control than would be going out on this process continuum. All right, I'll stop there. Again, subscribe if you want to hear more. I'm going to make some more videos on this topic. I hope you find them useful. as you go to the grocery store.